Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today's presentation is about research design in observational research. Well, this presentation is part of a playlist on observational research. I hope you watch previous videos in order to better understand the context of our presentation of today. Well, I need to come back to this slide and remind you that I am presenting the research design within the family of observational research. And observational research is the research which is considered as non-manipulative or correlational, where the study design is typically representing realistic conditions. Well, the audience of this presentation of today is mainly researchers who are conducting quantitative research or correlational research based on observations, and the lecture is very helpful for researchers who are going to submit a dissertation or a thesis or a conference paper or a journal article using observational research methods. Now let's check the objective of this lecture of today is actually mainly to enhance your capacity to conceptualize, design and conduct observational research, and to formalize an appropriate research strategy and study design based on best practices. The content of today's presentation is mainly introduction on the research design, what it is, what are the main steps of research design, what could be the research strategies that could be used. Maybe it's more focused on medical research, but maybe you can use it in your research context. What about operationalization, the study scope definition, how to set up your observation context, and how to start your data collection planning and sampling framework before some takeaway messages. So let's go on. Well, research design is a very important step, and it is the overall strategy that you choose to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way, thereby ensuring you will effectively address the research problem, and it constitutes the blueprint for the collection, measurement, and analysis of your data. So this is, in short words, the research design. Now, research design argues for an appropriate research strategy. So here you need to make sure that your strategy is valid, it is reliable, and it allows you to operationalize the concepts into indicators. And it argues for a scope, data collection method, and sampling method. And for sure, it argues for study boundary conditions and for limitations so that your study becomes valid and reliable. Now, when is research design positioned? Well, it is positioned after that you have defined your research problem and your major research and your general research question, and that you have already a theoretical conceptual framework for your research, defining the concept and theories that you want to work on. And for sure, don't forget that the research problem is already also tackled. And here, after that, you can only start your research design. So research design is a step before your data analysis and before your data collection, in order to make sure that you will proceed with your observations in a professional way. But we should not forget that in the research design, we define how are we going to collect our data, how are we going to process our data, how are we going to develop or create our statistical tests in order to establish a variance or correlation or association or causation, and also how are we going to apply or validate our testing and our outcomes. Now, what are the steps I do when I conduct my research design? Well, research design includes the research steps, and here we are talking about global objective of translating the research objective and conceptual framework and operationalizing it into a technical plan. So you need here to come up with a technical plan that is composed of a research strategy, material, data, research plan. This is all titled research design. And when we talk about research strategy, it's the first decision to make you move from the conceptual part of the research cycle to the technical design part of your research cycle. Now, when we conduct the research design, actually we need first to establish our research question and the goals. We have to have our problem statement, the objective and the questions already defined. We need to have our theoretical framework and our operational work is already conducted, and only then we can start do our research design. So it is directly following operationalization. Now, what are the available research strategies that we can use? Well, when we investigate observational research, there is no common school or rule that says what are the research strategies that are commonly used in observational research, but there is agreement in the medical research field about 4 research strategies. What I'm going to share with you here, 4 famous design strategies or types of observational research, but don't forget that this is mainly for a medical research. If you are in engineering or social sciences or humanities or other domains, it's not necessarily that those strategies are working properly. Now, as you can see here, we ask ourselves, what are those four research types? Cohort study, case control study, cross-sectional study, longitudinal study. And like I told you, they are used in the medical field. Cohort study follow a group of people to track factors and outcomes over time. Case control study compare the histories of a group of people with a condition to a group of people without intervention. Cross-sectional study assess the prevalence of an outcome in a broad population at one time in time, used to determine actually the prevalence, and it is used in widespread studies. And finally, the longitudinal studies, they observe study of subjects over a period of time that can last for years. So those are the four main categories. Maybe I give you some details very fast. If you are in the medical field, you will be interested. Well, cohort observation, they help to understand cause and effect. And here we are using a cohort observational study that looks at the cause, incidence, and prognosis. And the main characteristic or the strengths of this approach, that the temporality between exposure and outcome is well defined, and that the retrospective cohort is relatively fast in conduction and is inexpensive. Now, when we talk about the case control study, it is aiming to identify individuals with an existing issue or condition or cases along with a similar group without those conditions. So here we use the people with and without as controls, and this type of study is helpful to generate a hypothesis that can be researched. The main advantage of the case control study design is that it allows for comparatively needs few participants. It needs comparatively low participants and fewer resources. And it is also it can study the association of risk factors and outcomes in outbreak investigations. Now, on the third level of types of observational research that are commonly used in medical research is the cross-sectional design, and it does not explore cause and effect, but instead it looks at the prevalence at one very specific period on time. And here researcher would record information present in the population without manipulating variables or interventions. The advantage of this cross-sectional study design is that it is fast, it is inexpensive, it is useful for planning, monitoring and evaluation of public health, and it is also useful for population-based surveys. So this is the main advantage of cross-sectional study design. Now, the last type of observational research study could be the longitudinal study design. It looks at a prevalence over a period of time that can last for years. So this is more on several years. The advantage, it's fast and it is inexpensive and it is based on population-based surveys. So those are the four types of research, observational research. And as you can see in medical research, when we look at the strengths in regard to the conclusion, the upper we go higher, the more the conclusion can be conclusive or can be comprehensive, and they are based on evidence, because longitudinal study, they observe subjects over a period of time that can last for years. It is not very strong in general. Then we can go stronger and stronger. The cross-sectional assesses the prevalence of the outcome in a broad population at a one point of time. Case control is more strong because we compare histories of group of people with condition to a group of people without intervention. And the cohort study, we follow people, the group of people to track risk factors and outcomes over time. It's more detailed and more specific. So you can see here the strengths of the conclusions coming out of using those four types of observational research. Now let's move to the operationalization, which is a very important step, and you need already to have conducted your operationalization as part of your research design. And as we mentioned earlier in previous video about operationalization, here you are tackling your research question, you have already a research objective that is very clear, and you are also have an idea about your research type and your setting that you are working on. Like we said, you move your concepts, you operationalize them to translate them into variables and indicators that could be measured with certain units, and you can also use your standards or your protocols of measurement that you will use for your observations, and not only then you are ready for your data collection step. One of the very important component of any research design is also to address the study scope. What will be the boundary condition of your study? In this sense, you need to set up your research question at the beginning and to define your motivation of your research. You need to come up with inclusion and exclusion criteria for your case study or for your participation selection to make sure how and why you are going to focus on a specific sample of population. You need also to define your system boundary. Simply, you need to set some criteria that are specifying which system that you want to study from everything else and how you distinguish your sample. And it is useful to define things that are not part of your study too, because you need to say what are the things you are not going to measure. So all assumptions that you are taking through or during your research design need to be shared in this section in order to make your work more transparent and understandable. Also, all ethical concerns and privacy concerns need to be addressed in your research design, so you need to have your statement on the consent, involvement of animal, involvement of humans, how you're addressing that, how you're sharing their data, are you going to pre-register your data, and so on. So all research ethical concerns need to be addressed as part of your research design, and they are part of your boundary condition. And when we talk about the boundary conditions of your research, you need to develop the inclusion and exclusion criteria like the examples here. You need to talk about the time, the period of your measurement, the dates, exposure of your interest, the geographical location and the context where you are conducting your measurements, what will be the language you are using, who are the participants, the types of participants, peer reviewers if they are to test or validate your measurement protocol, your questionnaire, for example, reported outcomes, what are they are going to be, what is the setting you are going to measure your observation in, and your overall study design and the type of publication you want to generate even after conducting your research. Now allow me to move to the observation setting, which is also a very important component of your research design. Now, when we talk about observational research, one of the most important items or the key items are your subjects. Your subjects could be animals, could be humans, could be plants, materials, structures, machines, devices, whatever. But you need to define your subjects. And next to that, you need to define the setting where you are going to observe your subjects. So the setting is where the observation is carried out depending on the objective of your study and the type of data you are trying to collect and the resources you have available for your study. So 5 different features should be considered when designing the ideal observation study from your project. You need to see if you are working in a natural versus a contrived environment, or if you are working in a disguised or a non-disguised environment. Are you working with humans or collecting data through humans, or you are collecting data through mechanical devices? Are you doing a direct investigation or observation in a direct environment or in an indirect condition? Are you going to have structured setting or a non-structured settings? These are the 5 types of settings that needs to be defined. And allow me to go into detail to explain each of them. As you can see, the natural versus the contrived environment. The natural setting simply is observing subject in their real environments, no way of influencing what your subjects are doing, and it is for sure time consuming to gather the information. While when we talk about contrived setting, here we are having specific situation that will be studied and it is created by the observer, and here we offer the observer greater control over the gathering of data, and it enables to gather information more quickly and efficiently, and for sure it is questionable to whether or not the data collected does truly reflect the real life situation and how you are bordering the experimental research approaches. The second parameter or the second condition for your setting of observation will be the disguised versus non-disguised. When we talk about disguised observation, subjects here are more naturally when they are being observed. So ethical concerns over recording behavioral information that would normally be private or not voluntarily revealed unless performed in a public setting and subjects are anonymized. This is possible if you are in open spaces and public settings, but if you are doing non-disguised observation here, you alleviate the concern of result validity. Also, non-disguised approach offers the advantage of allowing the researcher to follow up with the observation with the questionnaire and investigate and ask the subject in order to get deeper information about the subject's behavior. So this is the advantage of this non-disguised. The third setting that you need to focus on and be aware about are what will be your observational research strategy. Are you going to use human being to observe the data and collect the data for surveys or questionnaires, or are you using mechanical observation, so simply involving various types of machines to collect data, devices, sensors, whatever, which then will be interpreted by researchers into numbers, for example, and here it could be even a satellite tracing the movement of people or tracing the ground cover change, for example. And the mechanical ways of capturing data in observation studies could be also videos, data loggers, smartphones, and so on. So this is also a third question you need to answer. Is my observation setting focused on human or mechanical observations? The fourth question that needs to be answered in regard to your research setting as part of your research design is if you are using direct or indirect observation. Direct observations involve looking at the actual behavior or occurrence rather than a result of that occurrence, which would be indirect observation. An example can be observing how much antidepressant pills were purchased in a particular neighborhood. While indirect observation, we go through prescription at pharmacies to see how many pills are sold. So this is indirect observations that tend to be used when the data cannot be gathered through direct means, or when gathering the data through direct observation tends to be too expensive. So also this is a fourth question you need to answer when you are designing your research. And the last setting question will be if you are using structured or non-structured settings. Structured observations are simply data collected that can be organized into clear categories or groups so that the observer can record the data by making of a category on an observation form. And if you are using non-structured observation, they are looking for specific facts or actions, but rather are capturing everything that occurs. So here is also the difference between the structured and the non-structured. So coming back to the summary of this setting, you need to define your research settings as part of your research design. And in order to define your research settings before conducting your observations, you need to answer the 5 questions related to those 5 types of settings, and every time you need to be specific and mentioning which choice was made and why and how you are going to proceed with your measurements. Now, once we are done with the setting, we can move now with the data collection plan and our sampling framework. Those are 2 steps that we can work on in parallel. When we talk about the data collection plan, it involves the data collection, the data processing, and the test and the statistical analysis you are going to conduct. And for sure, what kind of outcomes that you are investigating. Is it variance? Is it correlation? Is it association? Is it causation? And you need always to test and validate your findings, and this is part of your research plan. And when we talk about research design for observational research, by default we are talking about quantitative data analysis. So we are collecting data and observations in order to handle them and treat them, and they are quantitative by default. But it's very important that when you start your data collection and your sampling process, that you define what will be the levels of measurements that you will have, what kind of data types you are using. Are you going to use nominal data? Are you going to do ordinal data? Are you going to do interval data? Are you going ratio data? And these are different numerical data representation for your measurement that will influence your questionnaire and will influence your data collection approach, so that you later on, when you start processing them and conducting your statistical test, you are already defining what kind of levels of measurement you are using. Well, this is the end of today's presentation. Some takeaway messages for you. Well, observational research refers to situations in which one can not interfere and intervene. So it's very important to take this into account before starting. You need to choose the appropriate observational research type and setting early on and define it as part of your observational research. Also, you need to strike a suitable compromise between the amount of data collected and the cost of collecting the data. And for sure, you need to be transparent and allow for reproducibility of your work. So make your work transparent, pre-register your work if possible or your project, and allow others to understand how did you design your research and how did you collect the data. Data need to be presented in a transparent and honest way, and also the statistics is a big bag of tool. You need from the beginning to pick the right test that matches the question and apply it to your research question. So instead of wasting a lot of time, you need in the research design process to translate your research question into also specific parameters and into specific statistical tests that will be used to help you with coming up with general conclusion. And finally, the challenges of observational studies are always that it is time consuming, it is unstructured data can be not useful, and for sure the researcher themselves, they could be biased, so you need always to work on these aspects. Make sure that your work is not time consuming, you are structuring your data early on, and that you are doing your best to avoid or objectivize your approaches and avoid researcher bias. Well, this presentation was about research design in observational research. I invite you to follow up the videos and watch this playlist till the end, because it will help you to better understand and prepare your research in observational research. And today's presentation was mainly about research design in observation research. Thank you very much for your follow-up.